Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. Good piece by Daniel McCarthy in The Spectator. This ride is brought to you by Nike. You saw the Nike store on Michigan Avenue in Chicago get looted over the weekend.
Yep. Broke my heart. Well, every single store that went down.
Don't cry for Nike. Best thing that ever happened to them.
Why?
This is a victory lap for a moral revolution in education, one that has created a mythology in which police and other traditional authorities are automatically assumed to be evil, while young vandals who riot on the pretext of social justice are wholly innocent. Why are the police reluctant to put down the mayhem in the streets? Because they're not allowed to. They answer to politicians who are afraid of being called bad names in the press and who need the support of the rioters' upper middle class enablers. The enablers include not only Democrats, but a great many elite libertarians and non-Trump Republicans. And not only the media and academy with their known liberal bias, but also corporate America, which brings us to Nike. This just proves Nike is the footwear brand of the revolution. That cool, edgy looter you see with his liberated Nikes is a walking advertisement, better than any money can buy. Others who admire the authenticity and passion and living purity of the looter, white suburban teens, for example, or leftist Ivy League lawyers, will go out and buy Nike so they can be part of the revolution too. Absolutely right. I absolutely agree with him.
Yeah.
Absolutely agree with him. For more on this celebration of anarcho-looting, we're pleased to be joined by Roger Kimball, editor of the new Criterion. Roger, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure.
I
don't own Nikes myself.
Not yet. You don't.
You want to be woke? I'd suggest getting a pair.
Yeah, you want to be part of the revolution, or do you want to be torn asunder by
it?
it?
I want to be part of civilization.
Well, I don't know if that's going to be an option.
It may not be an option.
Your take now. I want to be careful because I've been re-educated by Nicole Hannah-Jones. I want to be careful in terms of just throwing the term violence around, because I understand that looting is not violence and damage to property is not violence either. So we need to be very careful about the terminology here.
Right. Well, Calvin Coolidge, a sort of smart chap, pointed out many years ago that at the end of the day, property rights are human rights. And the spectacle of these privileged thugs, paid for often by people like George Soros, getting their marching orders and a little cash to go around and smash up other people's property is it's out of some kind of dystopian novel. And people riding the tiger think that it's lots of fun until the tiger turns around and eats them. It's a very dangerous thing that we're playing with, and I hope it ends well, but it could end very badly indeed. And it's a reprise of the late 1960s and 1970s when this sort of thing swept the country. We managed to diffuse it then, but let's see if we could do it again.
Well, what is the end game for the anarchist? I mean, really?
Well, the end game, what they want, of course, is, two things. Approximately to destroy Donald Trump. But in the long run, they hate America. And in a funny way, you can't blame them. They've been taught in our schools and colleges for decades that it is an evil society based on racism. You mentioned the 1619 Project. I mean, that's part and parcel of this campaign to delegitimize the United States of America. If, in fact, the country were a slaveocracy, as the 1619 Project maintains, and if, in fact, the American Revolution was fought primarily to protect the institution of slavery, as they assert, then we could it would make sense. It would make sense that what these people are doing. But of course, that's not true. It's not true. America is, as Lincoln, put it, the last best hope for mankind. It's a country conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. And it's that noble vision noble ideal that we strive for. Like any ideal, it's never perfectly instantiated, but you can see by the hundreds of thousands and millions of people who want to come here every year that it's still a great magnet for human aspiration. It should tell us that the people who are seeking to destroy us are not only misguided, but in many cases evil.
Joe Biden yesterday in Philadelphia, I thought he was pitch perfect in offering a siren song of the sentimental barbarian. Listen to what Joe Biden had to say.
The country is crying out for leadership. Leadership that can unite us, leadership that brings us together, leadership that can recognize pain and deep grief of communities that have had a knee on their neck for a long time. We have to be vigilant about the violence that's being done by this incumbent president to our economy and to the pursuit of justice.
It's Trump who is the perpetrator of violence, and despite the fact that Joe Biden's been in public office for nearly 4 decades, the responsible communities for some of the violence are not responsible because they've had a knee on their neck for a long time.
Yes, it's this whole episode is fraught with ironies, tragedies, and a lot of misinformation. You know, it used to be that we could have some faith in the idea that one is innocent until proven guilty. There's a lot of doubt surrounding what officer or former officer Chauvin did. I'm not going to get into that now. It's complicated, but people should not, I think, take the narrative at face value. It may turn out that it's, as in the case of Michael Brown and Ferguson, that it's much more complicated than we think. But Joe Biden, he many years ago he had his lips surgically sewn to the public teat of government administration, and I think these people they at an early age they go into what is laughably called public service, which means it's servicing them. They become rich and corrupt. The idea that Joe Biden, who's on the wrong side of the threshold of civility, could offer anything resembling leadership is almost sad. In my opinion, his campaign is a species of elder abuse.
Mm-hmm.
But
no, it's true. I mean, why would they put him up to do that? And we're learning this morning that he's going to George Floyd's funeral, one of the 3 funerals that he's having. I don't know if he invited himself or if he was invited by the family, but he did speak to the family members yesterday. I think even if you do get the invite, you sit that one out, don't you think?
It's all theater. It's repellent, really, and it shows you why people distrust and dislike and have contempt for politicians. As people are fond of saying, this is an inflection point. We'll see how the president handles it. So far, I think he's handled it very well.
You have some infighting happening among Democrats in big states with big cities that have big problems, like de Blasio and Cuomo in New York, in terms of the police response. But with respect to the president, I mean, so this is a moment for him to lead.
Yes.
And he has to make sure that he is on the side of peace, of peace in the streets, but he can't overreact either. And so your position on his invocation of a willingness to scramble the U.S. military if necessary is that I'm fine with that as a rhetorical position, as a motivator for states and localities, but I don't really want to see the 101st Airborne on the streets of Chicago.
Yeah. Well, no one does. And, but maintaining public order is absolutely critical. If the governors can't do it, then the federal government has to do it. No, I wouldn't want to see the Insurrection Act of 1807 invoked to insinuate the military onto our streets either. But it is a tool, and I think he's made it quite clear that he is on the side of civilization, property rights, ordinary citizens, not the savages and the cynical looters who are destroying property across the country. And if he has to do that. Otherwise, the electorate will spew him out come November.
Do you see this, as other many commentators have suggested, as potentially analogous to '68 for Nixon?
Yes, absolutely. I think that it says Yogi Berra put it, it's deja vu all over again. I think it's very analogous to '68, and the president has to be a law and order president. It doesn't mean that he has to be draconian, but he has to. This is critical. It's a national security issue. We cannot allow people to smash stores, burn police stations, and otherwise conduct themselves like barbarians.
Just some more decoding work here, if you could help me do some sleuthing. Now is a time to lead, but also a time to listen, Roger. It's a time to listen. Okay. I'm listening. I hear you, but what I hear when I hear politicians or left-wing Marxist pundits on cable news shows say it's a time to listen, I hear them saying it's a time to agree, it's a time to bend the knee, it's a time to appease.
Well, see, I think the calculated, cynical exploitation of George Floyd's death is really repellent. The police officer responsible or the police officer involved in his death was instantly dismissed from the force. He's been charged with third-degree murder and manslaughter. We'll see if he's guilty. We haven't seen the police body camera footage yet. The whole medical situation, I believe, is far more complicated than the narrative would allow. But this is, I really don't understand why people should think that the appropriate response to this fellow's death is widespread mayhem and looting. These are not protests. They're not. It's not a civil rights or a race riot. It is hooliganism.
Yeah, and also, don't you think that just the pent-up anger for being, sheltering in place for 11 weeks had something to do with it too? Yes. Because all these people have so much time on their hands that they just want to be a part of something. Yes, no, that is an element that hasn't really been explored. Yeah, it's in part that too, but I think we see the Antifa element is prominent. These are organized gangs that are being paid for by people who don't like us, and I think that we need to stand up for our civilization.
He is Roger Kimball, editor of the New Criterion. Roger, always a pleasure. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, and he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Connect with Dan and Amy using the AM 560 mobile app. Download it today at 560theanswer.com/mobile.
You're about to hear a commercial for a very unique mortgage team that has a very specific advantage that could save your family monthly and lifelong money.